Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So I'm going to go through Bobby Fischer's game, the third round of the Palma de Mallorca Interzonal. And this game was against a player called William G Addison. And I didn't actually know much about this guy. But looking him up, it said that he was an American player originally from Louisiana. And he was awarded the International Master title in 1967. And apparently he gave up chess after this tournament and started driving a taxi and found employment in a bank later on. So I guess in this case, Addison is actually quite outmatched by Fischer. He said that his peak ELO was 2490, which isn't that high really, especially by modern standards. So Fischer was rated about ELO 2700. So clearly Addison is outmatched in this game. So we'll see how we get on anyway. So Fischer was playing with the white pieces and he played e4. Addison played d5. And it said that here actually after d5, Fischer had a big smile or grin on his face after Addison played the Scandinavian move d5. I'm not really sure why, because in modern times, Scandinavian's actually pretty decent. I mean, a lot of YouTubers have played it, like John Bartholomew and Eric Rosen, I believe, plays it. And there's a lot of good trap lines in it, so I'm not sure why I had a big smile. Maybe it's just not played at elite level at this time. Anyway, he took the pawn. Black recaptured back, and then Fischer played knight c3, hitting the queen, and the queen dropped back to d8. The main moves here actually are to play queen a5 or queen d6. Queen d8 is not as popular. It's quite rare actually in the opening theory. But anyway, play continued on him with Fischer getting more space in the centre with d4. And Addison develops his knight to f6. And now bishop c4 was played. And here I think black actually made an inaccuracy. This isn't actually played very often. He played bishop f5, which I think is a bit of a mistake. Because now Fischer just plays queen to f3, hits the bishop and hits the pawn on b7. Basically sacrificing a pawn on c2 as well for Fischer. If black takes this pawn though, it's probably not very good, because if bishop takes the pawn, white can play queen takes b7, and after the knight moves away, white can gain a good attack here with bishop to f4, developing everything. Black can of course play rook b8, but then queen takes a7, we get into this really tricky variation. And if black continues to devour some pawns here with rook takes b2, white just wins with bishop takes the pawn, and after queen c8 there's bishop a6, and the queen for black is trapped. So instead of taking and going pawn grabbing in this variation, the best move in this position was actually e5. If black did play this e5 move, Fischer would have had to play bishop takes e5 with the trade, and black would have played knight to d7. But white's still better after queen e3. And in this variation, even after rook takes b2, we see that white's doing really well here. Just got a massive lead in development. And for top players, we would have played e6 here. Pawn takes and play knight to f3. And basically now white will just take on e6 at a later date, play knight g5 perhaps, castle kingside, and even if we get to an endgame, white's always got this passed pawn. So white's doing very well in this position. Black didn't go pawn grabbing though, realising queen takes b7 is just really strong, so Addison played queen c8, defended the bishop and the pawn at the same time. Fischer didn't really care about his c2 pawn though, he sacked it again with bishop g5. And this time Addison did take, he played bishop takes c2. So Fischer's sacked a pawn and he plays rook c1. Hits the bishop, which drops back to g6. And we see after knight g to e2 and knight to d7, Fischer's got a massive lead in development. Pretty much all his pieces are developed after he castled next move. So all his pieces are now developed. The sacked pawn was probably worth it because now it eyes up this file against the queen for black. And basically black's in quite a difficult position because they're going to really struggle to develop these pieces. White's ready for the attack straight away. So e6 was played by Addison, a good move, trying to develop his bishop on f8. But now Fischer's probably just too fast with his attack. Now here actually there's a crazy computer variation that occurred. So there's a crazy variation that Fischer missed. I wouldn't say missed though because it's absolutely insane. But Fischer could have played knight to f4 here. Point being is if black played bishop e7, then white sacks some pieces, plays knight takes e6, pawn takes and bishop takes, stops black from castling kingside. The point being is if, let's say bishop f7 here, white could continue with taking on f6, and if bishop takes f6, take on f7, king takes f7, and knight to b5. And at the end of this variation, there's knight d6 with check, and the rook can take the queen, and also the knight and the rook are threatening to take on c7. So let's say queen to d8, there's just rook takes c7 at the end of it. And even though white's actually a piece down, these two rooks are really underdeveloped for black. And moves like queen to d5 spring to mind here, or even just knight to d6. And white's got an incredible attack. So after knight to f4, bishop e7, and the sacrifice again. Bishop f7 isn't mandatory, but even after, let's say, queen d8 getting off the c file, white can play queen takes b7. And if rook to b8, there's queen takes a7, rook takes b2. And this is an absolutely insane variation because white can play rook to e1. And again, if bishop to f7, the computers come up with this nice move. Bishop takes knight, queen takes, queen a8 check. Another sacrifice, rook takes e7, king takes, and queen to a3 with check. And once the king moves, white will win back their rook and have an extra, let's see, 2 pawns here. With some great play in the endgame because we've got this passed a pawn. However, knight to f4 is ridiculous, let's be honest. That's a really typical computer idea. Instead, though, Fischer just played bishop takes knight, and he took back with the pawn. If knight takes, then white will have played d5 here, opening things up because if pawn takes, there's knight takes, bishop d6, knight takes f6, pawn takes and queen takes, and white's in a vastly superior position. So g takes f6 was pretty much forced by Addison, and now Fischer just slowly creeps up his attack here. He plays d5, trying to open up the position once again. Because if black takes this, obviously it's suicide because that opens up the e file. So e5 is pretty much forced here. And Fischer now pins the knight on d7, bishop to b5, threatening queen takes f6 because the knight is pinned. So bishop e7 is played to protect f6. And Fischer reroutes his knight to g3. Leaves some space here to open up for the e file if need be. But I think the main idea is to just maybe put a knight into e4 or a knight into f5 at some point. Addison kicks the bishop, a6, the bishop drops back to d3. Black's now got a decision to make. If black takes this bishop, then I think Fischer obviously would have recaptured it. And I think white's in the driving seat. Black's really struggling to develop here. The queen on c8 looks awful, and these two rooks are really going to be hard to develop. And the king is stuck in the centre. So looks at knight to b6 in this variation. I think Fischer would have continued with a move like knight to e4. Threatening to play d6 because the pawn on the c file is pinned. So if black unpins the queen, what happens? Well, this move comes in, springs to mind, knight to f5. Because if queen takes the knight, knight d6, check, a discovered attack against the queen. For instance, if pawn takes, obviously this queen takes queen. So after knight to f5, if black tries to go to safety with castles, then white could have followed up with knight takes bishop, queen takes, and now this move d6. Again, the c pawn is pinned, and now the queen's attacked. It probably, I don't know if it threatens anything because if pawn takes queen, then there's always rook takes. There's always rook takes queen at the end of it. But after, let's say, queen to d7, white can play queen e3 and attack this knight on b6 because the c pawn is pinned. And if the king goes to b8, white has this d takes c7, winning material. So bishop takes d3 will probably be suicide for black. So instead, queen d8 makes a lot of sense by Addison in the game. And now Fischer plays h4, preparing h5. So black stops this. But Fischer now plays a very nice move, bishop to f5. Just gains more space and more squares for this bishop. And after knight to b6, Fischer plays knight c to e4. So all these pieces are now coming in to the attack and actually sacrifices the d pawn here. And luckily Addison decided to take this, so we'll see what happens. So he takes the free pawn. The point being is now Fischer just gets his rook onto another open file. So these two rooks are just absolutely dominating this C and D file right now. c6 was played by black to shore things up, but now the point of this sacrifice, knight to c3. The rook and the queen and the knight all converge on this d5 square, and it looks as though Fischer's going to win back his pawn with ease. Queen b6 was played, getting off the d-file. But now here a really clever move by Fischer. So I think most of us would play knight takes d5 here. But Fischer comes up with a good move, rook takes d5 instead. After pawn takes, Fischer took that with the knight, hits the queen, and threatens knight to c7 with check. So Addison is forced pretty much to play queen takes b2, because it hits the rook on c1. Now, according to Stockfish, Fischer missed a really nice win, or a quicker win here with just rook c7 just wins here. The rook hits the bishop with the knight. After bishop d6 in this variation, there's bishop to d7 check, king f8, and Fischer could have finished with queen takes f6. Queen takes rook is threatening checkmate, and also the queen's threatening to take the bishop. And this would be resignable now for black. An absolutely terrible game if this happened. After queen takes b2 though, Fischer just played rook to b1 instead. And pretty much the same thing happens. There's queen takes a2, Fischer takes on b7 and attacks the bishop on e7. And here actually Addison resigned the game. There's not really much black can do in this situation, because if bishop takes f5 for instance, white can play knight takes f5. All the pieces are attacking the bishop. Black can of course throw in a check, but once king h2 there's no more checks. And what does black do in this situation? I looked at bishop to a3, but now just comes knight takes f6. The f6 pawn and square is weakened. And after king f8 there's just queen to g3, threatening checkmate on g7. And that would be game over. So I don't think black particularly played this very well, but Fischer played a nice simple game here. He made it look very simple to defeat an international master. And yeah, he's one step closer to qualifying for the candidates in this tournament. We'll look at round 4 next. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you all for watching.